Hello there, my name is MSB, and today I will be explaining to you the ways of highlights and shadows. Now there are three different tools you can use for this. You can use a brush tool, or you can use the dodge tool in combination with the burn tool. Now for the brush tool, it requires several layers. So you make your first layer, and you can either do this one of two ways. You can either first start off by making building your shadow layer, then slowly building up to your highlights. Or you can do the opposite, where you start with your highlights and build downwards to your shadows. That's the way I'm going to do it. So we have your first layer is this, and it is our highlight color. And you just make a little dot. And then you make another layer, make it below it, pick a color, new color, slightly darker than the old one. And you do that, new layer, below the old one, slightly darker color, another dot, and you keep doing that until you get something like this. You see that? That's called a gradient, and that's the effect you're always shooting for. Now, going back, let's talk about the burn and dodge. Okay. So, dodge tool. So the dodge and burn tool work by enhancing whites and blacks. The dodge tool enhances whites, making things appear brighter. The burn tool enhances blacks, making things appear darker. And so you use the dodge tool to make your highlights, the burn tool to then make your shadows. So they both use the same sort of settings, which makes things very nice and easy. You can use a custom brush, like one of these fancy things, or you can do what I do and just use a round brush. And I always have the hardness set to 0%, so it makes things a little bit nicer. You can play with that hardness. It actually makes a difference, seriously. Now your color range is set to shadows, midtones, or highlights. So you start off with highlights, and then midtones, and shadows does pretty much nothing. So and then we have our exposure rate. So let's see. So like 100%, this is what happens. When I had 100%, you can see the shadows good and highlighted. Yeah, anyway. See, that's 100%. And then when you get an exposure of, say, around 50, okay, that's 51. Whoop-de frickin' do. And then when we go down to even lower, see, you see the difference? The difference is really in the edge. It gets slightly darker and more blurred the less exposure you get. Now, I always use very low exposures because they offer a lot more control over what you're doing because it does smaller amounts, whereas at the higher percentages you don't get that. Okay, and then finding a spray paint protect tones. Spray paint is, well, if you ever used a brush tool, you should know what that does. I don't feel like explaining it. Protect tones, I don't know what that does, honestly. I always have it checked off, and it always works. So, paint broke, don't fix it. So let's get to the whole point of this, and shade, right? So before we shade, you need to think about your lighting angle, because that determines where the highlights and shadows are going to be placed. So if it's like dead on, you know, there's where your highlight will be, and your shadows will then be all around. Whoopsie. Whereas if it's coming from, like, say here, your highlight will be there and your shadows will be there. just sort of think of it in those terms. The best way to really think about where shadows and highlights go is to go look at a photos and just draw them or look at them, study them, where the highlights are, where the shadows are, where the lighting angle is, so you can figure that shit out. It takes a lot of practice, a lot of studying, and eventually you get it. Yeah. So I'm going to shade this, and the way I shade using I always start off with a dodge tool. And I start off right in the center. Actually, I'm going to use a very low, I always use very low exposures, like I said before. Okay, that's not what I meant. 5%, go back. So we're going to go from here. And I sort of radiate outwards really slowly. It's a long ass process. We keep going and going and going and going and going. And eventually it looks like this. So there's all the highlights taken care of. You know, you can sort of touch it up a little bit. Or not. I like how this turned out. And then we take the burn tool and we get our shadows in there. White shaders are going to be right here. Set it to even lower. And it looks just about perfect. It's not entirely perfect. It looks like a ball of clay if you ask me. Anyway, so now you have that taken care of. Let's talk about maybe giving it a shadow. Like it's going to cast a shadow. So to do that, what we're going to do is I'm going to make a new layer. And the new layer is going to go right underneath that my objects layer. Going back to my objects layer, I'm going to press Control, click, and that selects it. I'm going to go back to the layer I just made. And I'm going to press Shift F5. And this brings up the fill dialog. Make sure it's set to black, and you don't mess with these settings, and you press OK. And then you press Control D to deselect. Finally, get out the Move tool, and now we're going to actually make the shadow a shadow. Oh, whoops. I'm at the Control. So I'm pressing and holding Control button while I'm free transforming. And that allows me to do this magic thing. And you have it how you want. You press OK. It's still a little crooked. Whatever, I don't give a shit. And then I'm going to get out the Gaussian blur filter. Blur it up. I like that. I'm going to press OK. And then we lower the opacity. So a little bit more suitable. And we stand back and admire. Because we are finally finished. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. My name is MSB. Goodbye.